Ich freue mich sehr, jetzt mit Jean-Jacques Barbéris zu sprechen. Welcome, Jean-Jacques.
Hello.
And we will, hello, and we will talk, of course, about ESG in 2021. What matters now? The perception of ESG criteria in investing has changed dramatically. A short while ago, people were talking about how much return it will cost them to respect ESG principles. Now, they're asking how much would it cost them to ignore ESG criteria. ESG is becoming the new normal. Jean-Jacques, there you are. Hello.
Hello.
How did you perceive this change of mindset? Why do you personally sense such a high importance in sustainability and ESG?
No, thank you very much. And first, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I think this question is very important. And indeed, I think the evolution, the trend that we see is just a reflection, I believe, of the opinions around the globe on the topic. And therefore, I think we are really at a moment, at least in Europe, and I think that the geographical aspect is important, because what I'm going to say must probably be nuanced depending the countries we're talking about. I think we're really at a moment where there is some kind of an epistemological break, meaning there is a complete shift and change of mindset regarding the development of sustainable finance. 10 years ago, basically working in the sustainable department of a bank or an asset manager was not, I would say, for the best. At the moment, these are, I would say, positions where at least at Amundi we position our best talents. So I think the change is absolutely massive. The change is here for long. And what make me think that this is for long is notably because there is a change in the composition of the demand addressed on ESG. Before, it was mostly something that was coming from the institutional world, but last year in 2020, we've seen that it was more than 70% of the additional demands toward ESG products coming from the retail sector. And I think this is a very strong shift that we are seeing at the moment. And again, for the very good reasons that I believe individual investors are behaving like citizens. They are aware that we are already in the climate crisis, for instance, and therefore they try to do something about it also in their investments. And so personally, I strongly feel that this evolution, it's not that it is for long, it is that the whole market is going to shift and we will see a market that will be fully 100% ESG in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we see surveys which are showing that, especially among young people, the green aspect is the most important aspect, even higher than the return aspect. So this is really a major shift. Now, how did the COVID-19 pandemic impact ESG investing?
I think here there are a few words that we can use. I think the first word would be a catalyst, the second would be a crystallization, and the third word I didn't find a very good one, but I think the COVID crisis make new trends more visible. First, when it comes to catalyzing, I think it's just the figures that are talking very spontaneously about it. You can see that during the year 2020, the increase of the ESG market have been even bigger than in the past year. So really, it has accelerated a trend that was already there. That's one thing. The second thing is crystallization. I think the COVID crisis that we're still in has made the ESG market crystallize, meaning more and more focused on impact measurement or on things that are more substantial. It's not only about ESG, it's also about measuring the impact integrating ESG into investments may have. And that's one of the reasons, for instance, that we've seen this year an accelerating trend in the development with products that are Paris aligned, that are helping investors to engage into net zero path or these kind of things. And the last thing is that the crisis has revealed trends that were already there, but make them more vivid. And here I think in particular to the social part of ESG that we've seen the S part of the equation has become more and more important in the context we are living in, notably due for the very basic reason that we are entering progressively into a social crisis of unfortunately great magnitude in the different countries.
Now, last year, a significant progress was made on a number of EU regulatory projects, notably taxonomy, but also climate benchmarks and eco-labels. Are they a success in terms of ESG, and how will they affect investors?
Here, a few remarks. But first, I think as investors, we shall not wait for the regulation to be there to act, because otherwise probably we're going to miss our targets, notably when it comes to climate targets. That's one thing. Second, I think we must welcome the fact that there is regulation at stake on that field, because it's standardized a little the market that is at the moment extremely diverse. And in that sense, at Amundi, we are very supportive, notably of European labels that can be used in all the different EU member states. I think what is important to understand when it comes to the regulation is that first there is a lot that is coming and that is expected, notably on the corporate side, the NFRD, so a new financial regulation disclosure directive is going to be very important in the ESG market, because that will help to standardize the criteria and the data we use to measure companies. But I think we shall be also conscious of the fact that much more will come, I believe. And personally, I'm a huge fan of the concept of inevitable policy response, meaning in the context of an environmental crisis that is already there, I strongly believe that the regulation is going to be tougher and tougher. And I wouldn't be surprised that in a few years, we see, for instance, regulation imposing to have net zero ambitions, aligning, therefore, with the commitments that are going to be taken, that have been taken already by some countries, and that I hope will be made even more important in Glasgow. So I think for investors that we are, for our clients, it's important to consider the fact that, yes, the taxonomy is arriving. The taxonomy will impose a number of things to us, and probably for good, but I strongly believe that much more will come.
Yeah, setting the own benchmarks that is best for success, I guess. The markets actually sensed pretty early that Joe Biden is going to be president in the US, because green technology stocks were rising dramatically just ahead of the election. Now, what is your expectation regarding the US and Joe Biden?
I wouldn't dare to have expectations there, but I think first, but the French president had a nice tweet yesterday, which was a welcome back. So I think we shall all be very happy that the US are coming back in the Paris Accord in particular. It's interesting because I was looking a little bit this morning at the details of the 17 executive orders that President Biden signed yesterday, and I found 6 of them that are related to environment and climate questions. One being the letter sent to UNFCCC to come back to Paris being one, but a number of others, some being, I would say, symbolic regarding big projects, but some being also already, I would say, much more substantial on some sectors, for instance, regarding the emission standards for some vehicles. And also one last, which I think is extremely interesting, an executive order re-establishing a working group on the social consequences of the transition, meaning that something that at Amundi we believe is going to be very important on the agenda of policymakers and investors in the future, which is the fair transition question. How do you make the transition socially acceptable? Is something that is already in the first executive orders of the new elected American president, which I think is a signal that this question is going to be more and more important in the future. Then afterwards, the question, it's all about execution, and we will see the impact of the new regulations that are going to be passed. But I strongly believe that a lot of things are going to be done by this administration on that front. Also for one very political reason, which is the Democrat Party has evolved to be not socialist, the European way, but at least there are very much more, I would say, progressist type of forces in the Democrat Party than in the past. And I strongly believe that they will ask for their tribute in the victory of Mr. Biden. It's not the moment yet, probably because it's a moment of American unanimity and because we're still in the pandemic, but the tribute will be asked on a number of aspects, climate being clearly one. So I think we can expect a lot coming from this administration, and that will have impact on us all, because we can also imagine that the American administration is going to ask for equivalence or counterparties with its allies on this front. So I think we're at the beginning of a probably very big change in the US in that direction. I'm quite confident there, and I think this is for good. As a citizen, I'm very happy with that.
Mm-hmm. So maybe this was also the answer to my next question, which is who or which government could take an international lead in climate and environmental protection? Could that be the US?
I think at the end of the day, we all need to act, to be clear, both individually, collectively, and at country level. I think if you want to see the optimistic part of the half glass being full and not being empty, the fact that the European Union has engaged into carbon neutrality with a Green Deal, the fact that the US administration is also engaging into a Green Deal, I think are very important signals, because if these two major economies do not show leadership on that field, it's difficult to imagine that the others will follow. For me, something that was a key element in 2020, not being naive, but still, was the announcement made by the Chinese president of the ambition for China to go to carbon neutrality. It's a massive challenge. Let's be clear, we can imagine our Chinese friends are doing it also from, I would say, industrial leadership perspective, to say that nicely. But I think this is a very strong signal and a very important one. Now, what we can all hope is to see the Glasgow COP26 being a success with, I would say, additional commitments being taken. I'm relatively optimistic on that front, also for one reason, because I think it will be, it's in Scotland, but still the UK is going to take the lead in the discussions and the negotiation before COP26. They just exited EU, so they will fight, I think, like hell to have some kind of a diplomatic trophy to be shown to the rest of the world as soon as possible, and having a very successful COP in Glasgow can be one. So I think we can hope that our British friends and neighbors are going to push everyone to get into more concrete action, which afterwards will have very strong implications for financial players, because we can expect that these commitments are going to cascade down afterwards onto the companies into which we invest, and also, as I was mentioning, on additional regulations that will be on the financial sector per se.
Now, looking at Amundi, what are your plans for ESG investing in 2021?
It's first at Amundi, and I think it was in the little movie there, we have just finalized one of our important commitments, which was to be a 100% ESG, which means, concretely speaking, that if you invest into an open-ended fund of Amundi, by default, there is full ESG integration into all the investment processes. So I think this was a transformation that we have achieved now, and that is alive. Now, what is important is to show the results of it to our clients. So that's an ambition for 2021. And for 2021, I think the ambition that we have in particular are on two aspects. First, continuing to propose, I would say, what I call anchored type of solutions. So Paris aligned, net zero type of products, advisory capacities to help investors to engage into this pathway. So this is something that we're going to develop and to continue to develop. Also encouraging companies, because I know there are a number of corporates listening to us, to themselves take some commitments. So for instance, you might have seen that we are relatively active now in general assemblies to ask for management to propose and to engage onto, I would say, mitigation targets that are aligned with science. So for instance, we are very supportive of the Science-Based Targets initiative, and we engage all the European corporates at least to engage into it. And the second aspect on which we will have a lot of focus, whether on the social side of the equation, as I was mentioning, with also, I would say, new type of methodological equipment. It's complicated to say for a Frenchman. Equipment for our investors, trying to tackle both the social and the environmental question at the same time. So if you believe that fair transition is something that is, say, one of the key areas of development of politics, economics in the future, as an investor, how do you catch that? It's not a piece of cake to do that. It's not that super easy. And so we're trying our best to develop solutions on that field, but clearly trying to propose fair transition equipment to investors is going to be a very strong area for focus next year, this year actually.
Okay, so before we actually have a few questions from the audience, I have one last question, because I heard you were saying something about everybody should act him or herself. So what are your personal ESG goals this year?
It's a good question, but I think the first thing that everyone can do is trying to measure its own carbon footprint. There is a wonderful little tool that has been developed by the French independent think tank that is called MyCO2, which is a nice way to measure your own emissions, I would say, in what you're doing, what you're buying, etc. So that's something I did last year with the family. So now we have our own net zero pathway. We know what we need to do to be compatible. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's one thing. And I think my second ambition, which for me is the most important one, I'm the very happy father of a little boy who's 4 years and a half, and the other one is 1 month and a half, which explains the sleep deprivation, explains that I might have a very bad face in front of the camera at the moment because he doesn't sleep that much. But I think the ultimate ambition is to educate them, fully integrating these challenges, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are going to live with it. So I think that's my personal motivation, which makes me wake in the morning, I would say, on that front, apart from the professional commitment.
So congratulations, and I didn't see your eyeshadows, and they're only a sign of your working together with your son's mom in the nights to actually make the baby sleep, and I'm sure she appreciates it so much. So that was my hard to pronounce word. And now we go to the questions from our audience. Has ESG as a theme lost some attention in the public debate last year?
I think it's a very good question. Honestly, I don't think so, because when I make a parallel with the great financial crisis of 2008. At that point in time, I was more on the policy-making side. I was working in the French Treasury at the time, and I was in charge of preparing the financial negotiations for the Copenhagen conference. And because of the financial crisis, we've seen the climate questions literally being set aside out of the table. It has disappeared. And all the leaders who came to Copenhagen were scratching their heads, saying, okay, it's not the time to discuss that, because at the end of the day, what we need to do first is to do things for the economy. I'm very surprised and positively surprised by the fact that this is not the case this time. If you're looking at the Green Deal that has been agreed by the European Union, it's, I would say, a Keynesian instrument, but that is also incorporating carbon neutrality ambitions. And therefore, I don't think that the ESG debate has been put aside in 2020, not at all. I think it will still be on the table. And again, because fundamentally, the opinions have changed massively, at least in Western democracies. In other countries, then this is more questionable. And therefore, I strongly believe that this time, the climate commitments are not going to be considered as something that is nice to have, but later on.
Thank you very much. So what else do we have? Will there be a structural valuation gap between good and bad ESG companies? Will we see ESG bubbles as we have seen tech bubbles?
As we are still seeing a tech bubble at the moment, I think there is a perfect bubble, a very perfect bubble at the moment from an economic perspective. I think this is a very good question. And the question is excellent because there is an adjective that is complicated, which is the adjective structural. At the moment, there is a valuation gap between good and bad ESG companies. If you create European equity long short and that you're long the best ESG companies and you're short the bad early rated ESG companies, you have a difference of performance that is super important on the equity side. The cost of capital is also extremely different. It's interesting, when Germany issued its first green bond, the country issued a traditional bond the very same day, and there were, if I'm not mistaken, there have been 4 bips of difference. 4 bips when it comes to a German issuance, it's massive. So it means clearly at the moment, the ESG factor is priced in by the market. The question, and so I think this is going to continue notably because there is a very strong demand effect. If people like us are integrating ESG into their investment process, I would say naturally, therefore there is a natural additional demand for the companies that have high ESG scores. And then we can discuss if these scores are appropriate, are they the right one? It's a very fundamental and interesting debate, and that we need a few hours to discuss. So I think here the difference of valuation will continue. And then will it become structural, meaning fundamental and not only linked to a demand effect? I strongly believe it very much, but maybe not for the whole ESG, I would say at large with all the criteria that might mix a number of things, but maybe of some elements that are particularly important and fundamental. The one that is, I would say, absolutely obvious, being, again, your carbon path and your mitigation pathway.
Thank you. And I think we have one last question. Many companies are desperately looking for ESG specialists. What can be done to address this shortage?
It's a good question. I'm hiring at the moment. I think the first thing is to understand that more and more we all need to become ESG specialists. So I think you need some ESG experts, but also progressively everyone shall do its own education about it. And so I think how can we get out of the shortage of ESG specialists? I think, honestly, it's also a work with the academic world, so establishing partnerships with schools, showing that there is a demand there, and explaining what we need. But again, I strongly believe that more and more what we're going to need is, yes, ESG specialists for sure, but making sure that, I would say, the level of ESG culture and capacity and sophistication is going to be spread among all the companies that we're working on, which is not easy at all because it's a fundamental cultural change. The good thing is that all the young ones that are joining us, at least at Amundi at the moment, they join us, okay, because probably they want to work for Amundi, but they join us mainly because they want to generate impact as we are considered as a, let's say, credible ESG player.
Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, for your very interesting insights, and good luck with your own ESG goals. Good time with your family, and of course, stay healthy. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. No, danke schön. It was a pleasure.